Yeah, here we go. Let's get into it. Here we go. Let's open up a compressor. I'm opening it up by just hitting this right here. Little window. Here we go. And here's our compressor. So I heard two analogies about compression. One analogy and one just super basic explanation. The first one I'm going to go over is just the 10-second overview of what a compressor does. So compressor is a dynamic processor, and essentially it makes your volume less dynamic. So dynamic range, quiet, loud. Your volume's in between here. What a compressor at its most simple form does is bring down your louds and bring the whole thing up. So you can think of it like that. My favorite analogy is one that a music mentor / instructor at Pyramind Audio Production School in San Francisco. I took some online classes toward my tail end of high school. Rather than go to college, I did that. Anyway, David Earl is his name, SF Logic Ninja here on YouTube. I'll link down his channel below. He gave me an analogy that is genius, in my opinion. Just it simplified the whole compression process. So let's imagine you're driving in a car, you're the one driving, and you're with your grandma, and she doesn't really like loud noises in general because she's old. You're driving, you're like, hey grandma, listen to this guitar solo, it's sick. So yeah, you turn the volume up, and she is trying to pay attention to the song, but it's just too loud for her. So she reaches out, turns the volume down a little bit. That's compression. So let's break this down and put grandma into this compressor and see what she's doing as the compressor works. Input gain and output gain, let's talk about those last. The big things we're going to look at are threshold, ratio, attack, and release. Makeup gain and knee have their place. However, in this analogy, they're not in this. So threshold is the volume at which grandma reaches out to turn the volume down. So it reaches her loud threshold. She's like, this is uncomfortable for me. So I reach out and turn that down. Ratio, and I'll dive into this a little bit deeper after this analogy. However, ratio is simply going to be how much she turns it down. It's always going to be in a ratio of blank to 1. So 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 8 to 1, etc. Attack will be how quickly grandma reaches out to turn the volume down. And release is at what point she deems it safe to turn the volume back to its original form. Once it reaches below that threshold, that is. Again, grandma could be a compressor while you're driving, or this compressor in Logic is the same thing. Now let's go into those two other parameters I skipped over, makeup gain and knee. So I'll need to go into the graphical view to see what knee does. So knee is essentially going to be the sharpness of that volume adjustment. As I change the knee right here, you'll see a 0 knee is a very sharp, aggressive, okay, volume's going up, and then it hits the threshold, and then it breaks out. However, if I raise that knee, the knee will actually adjust how smooth or rounded off that corner is. This is going to be more noticeable as compression, and this will be a little bit more transparent. You won't notice it's going to be compressing as deeply. It's still going to compress, however, it's going to be kind of rounded off. And makeup gain, this one here in Logic actually has an auto gain. Click it off. So I'm going to keep that off for now for this explanation. What a compressor really does is it attenuates the peaks of a volume signal. So attenuate meaning it's just going to lower the volume or reduce. I have 2 to 1 ratio. There it is. And we have a negative 12 dB threshold right there. And let's just say we happen to have a signal that comes in at negative 10 dB. So it's louder than the threshold, so the compressor will be activated with that signal. And it's a 2 to 1 ratio. So let's do some quick math. The difference between those two, negative 12 and negative 10, is going to be 2 dB. So the threshold can be read as 2 dB in, 1 dB out. Or as I raise it, 4.1 in, 1 out. So let's keep it down at 2. So threshold, we have 2 dB over the threshold. We have a 2 to 1 ratio, which means we will have approximately negative 11 dB out of the compressor. So that's a 1 dB of gain reduction, which we can make up by bringing back. And the purpose of that is essentially if you don't want to have your volume just dropped and plummet, you can kind of adjust or bring the volume back up. So your dynamic range is shrunken, and then you bring it back up a little bit so you're not having to worry about too much signal loss. All right, let's talk about the purpose of input gain and output gain. Every plugin will have some usable range of signal level. So for this, I mean, I don't know exactly what it is. I'm just imagining. let's just say it can take in a signal of negative 60 dB to positive 3. Anything over positive 3, it'll clip. Anything below negative 60, it's too quiet to even use. So here, again, for simplicity's sake, let's just say it's too quiet. You can raise the input gain so it can actually work within your operating threshold, operating range, I should say. Or if the signal's too hot and still not clipping, but it's just too loud for your compressor to use, you can bring down the input gain. And moving past the compressor parameters, let's get into the output section. So you have a limiter, and not every compressor is going to have these. This is just general use for Logic. And plus, Logic has several other instances or different models of compressors that I'm not going to get into. These are all mostly based off of vintage compressors, you know, LA, 2A, 1176, etc. So let's stick here in the output gain section. This compressor has a limiter. So if you want your signal to be, if it is, say you're raising the volume essentially by having more makeup gain than the actual volume reduced by the compressor, you might need to apply a limiter. So again, a limiter is infinity to 1 ratio. So it's still a form of compression. However, a volume will never exceed your threshold. No matter what volume over your threshold you get, you're going to get 1 dB out. Keep moving. If you wanted to have a little bit of natural vintage replica distortion from your compressor, you can enjoy that there. And the mix, this is going to be a wet and dry knob. So dry being your unprocessed dry signal, you know, before it's compressed. Output is your wet signal, so it is going to be compressed. If you wanted to have a crazy high compression amount, so like 10 to 1 and negative 40, this is smashing your dynamic range. So you can always blend in your dry signal. Kind of cool if you're wanting to do that. And output gain is just going to be your volume out. This will adjust your output going into your next plugin, which is where signal chains and gain staging is super important when you're mixing, because if you have a bunch of plugins at the beginning that are clipping, you can't fix that. You have to fix that at the source, whether it's, you know, the earliest plugin or the actual instrument itself. So I got an instance here of Modern Drummer. Let's hear this in practice. So let's hear, this is a snare drum in sound check cadence. So you'll notice every time the snare hits, it is reducing the volume. It's attenuating or compressing. Let's lower this a little bit and kind of make it more drastic so you can see. If you have any question what anything does, just raise the knob up all the way or down, except for like gain. You might die. It's really loud sometimes. But here we are. So compressor is active. And that's pretty heavily compressed. But you can go further. So for every 3 dB over negative 40 dB, so we're pretty high above that. It's going to be compressing a lot. So right now, if we go to our meter, we can see our gain reduction is dipping almost around negative 20 dB. Let's go back to graph so I can visually see this. I like this view. I like this a lot. Anyway, so there's our compressed signal. Let's change the attack and release and see what really changes. So you'll notice if I have the attack at 0, 0 attack is kind of dangerous just because sometimes you might get some artifacts or clicks and pops. However, let's just try it. Turn off auto, by the way. So the entire transient is being compressed because we're giving literally 0 milliseconds of space between when the signal hits and when the compressor is activated. So it's basically reading it immediately. And as I bring this out, you'll notice that part of the drum hit is getting past the compressor because the attack is being raised. So if I raise this to 60 or 70 milliseconds, you'll notice a chunk of that snare drum is going to be loud just because it's getting through without being compressed. Really neat, actually. So it's kind of cool how you can visually see what's happening in here. If I raise this all the way, the snare hit might not even be compressed at all. So you're even able to hear some of that room noise be compressed as well. So I want to bring that back down to 5. As I bring that release out, you're going to notice that that room noise is going to be a lot more apparent. So the drum sample, the actual hit of the drum is being compressed. However, with a very quick release, you're going to hear that room noise come back as the compressor is basically turning itself off. And if I crank it up to, let's max it 5 seconds, that compressor takes a long time to get back to 0. So much that it's not even actually turning off. I hope this simplifies a lot of the compression process. You know, it's one of those things I've heard people say you can mix a whole album with just 4 things: compression, EQ, delay, and reverb, and you can literally make whatever you want happen. And I can kind of get in that boat. I think it's actually pretty accurate. These, I mean, compression, EQ, those are your entire tonal shaping tools. You can get into the nitty-gritty limiters, expanders, noise gates, things like that. But in theory, if you have good sources of signal and good sources of, you know, your instruments, you won't need a whole lot of additional stuff. Anyway, that goes over compression at the introductory level. I will dive into some of this stuff later on with more detail. I'd like to get in and just talk about each of these different models of compressors. I might even introduce like the Waves CLA. Those are great plugins. I love those. Again, thanks for 1,000 subs. I could not have done this without you guys, because I mean, I'm just making the videos and you guys seem to like it. So if you like this, do me a favor and hit like or subscribe down below. And if you're interested in seeing more of this stuff, you can turn on the bell. I will have some more of these types of videos in the future, especially with Logic Pro. I might even get into Ableton a little bit, get into some of the other plugins that I have. And if those interest you, I'll see you next time. All right, thank you so much.